Hi.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Why don't you give us an introduction of who you are and kind of walk us through your journey as a pre-professional dancer to professional? I already told you I've been following you in your ABT days for years. So definitely fill us in.
Okay, yeah. So my ballet road started pretty young. I think I was around 6 years old. I One of my best friends in school, she went to ballet after school every day, and I just idolized her and wanted to be just like her. That's the reason I started dancing. It wasn't because I wanted to do ballet necessarily. It was just because I wanted to be like this girl. Her name was Brianna. Anyway, and I loved it, and I it was always my favorite. Ballet was always the top of the list for me. So um, I trained probably the most seriously with Oregon Ballet Theater, and then did some ABT summer intensives. Probably 3 years, I think I did ABT summer intensives, and that sort of is what brought me to New York. The last summer they offered me the studio company contract,
Mm.
and so I was fortunate enough to accept that and move to New York at 16, and did a year of maybe a year and a couple months of studio company, and then a contract opened up in the main company, and so I joined the main company at 17, and danced with ABT for 10 years, and then I finished sort of. I had some injuries, kind of the last 3 years of my career there. And so that's sort of what led me towards kind of stopping dancing as a professional. And then I took sort of an administrative position with the school. I was the student life coordinator, and I learned a lot through that. And that's sort of also where I started teaching a little bit. So I did the national training curriculum with ABT. I did all the levels. It was incredible. It's such a great program, and started teaching, sort of subbing here and there, different levels within the school. And then I had my son. And then the year after that, I started teaching for the school instead of doing the student life position. Then I've been teaching for the past 6 years since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you moved to New York at a pretty young age. How was that move? Were you with family? Were you alone?
Yes. So one dancer in the company, she was about 5 years older than me. Her name was Angela. She had trained also at my school and moved to New York.
Mhm.
And it just so happened that her roommate moved out, so she needed a roommate, because that was a big thing. My parents were
Yeah.
very happy for me, but also sort of like, well, Leann, how are you going to move to New York at 16? Where are you going to live? So she sort of took me in and showed me the ropes of living in New York City and helped me kind of figure everything out.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, because I speak to so many dancers who make that move at such a young age. It's usually after a summer intensive, and then they're in another state. I work with a ton of dancers that will be in another state from their parents, and it's definitely a huge obstacle in regards to fueling their body. So how
Mm.
was that? I mean, at what point did you as a dancer connect that your food choices were impacting your body?
Right. Well, I think as a student, before I moved, I had a pretty, good head on my shoulders, and at my family, we always ate very healthy. So
Mhm.
that was a good setup for me. But yeah, it is a transition when you're on your own, and
Mhm.
you have influences from other people around you who do things a little differently. I was never afraid of eating carbohydrates.
Got it.
I think there was a point in probably probably actually once I was a professional in the main company and feeling a lot of pressure in my role there, where I struggled a bit. But I was an adult at that point, so I just sought a therapist and you know
Hmm.
figured out how to navigate through that. And so yeah.
Yeah, so many good points you bring up. The first, you use the word influence, which is so important in today's day because unlike when you were transitioning in that time, obviously social media is a much larger role in these younger dancers' lives. And they can have access to a ton of misinformation, and maybe not misinformation, but just what might work for someone won't be appropriate for like a very active dancer. So I love hearing that you had this framework that wasn't based around like fear of food or fear of carbohydrates. And it sounds like you really were able to hold on to the idea of balance and what you needed as a dancer. But the biggest thing here is it sounds like you, in your professional years, realized that seeking support was something that you needed.
I think we all need support at different times in our lives. And I think it's important for dancers to know that if they are struggling, or if they even if they don't know if they're struggling per se, but they feel something's off, or, there's no shame in seeking help or seeking advice. Even it's not even help. It could just be, I need to go see a nutritionist. I need to really get the basics down, and I need to figure out a plan, or whatever it might be. It might be physical, it might be emotional, it might be mental, but to never be afraid to ask for that support when you feel like you might need it.
Yeah, and another thing that I notice with younger dancers, I am guilty of this myself, is they can get so hyper focused on what they're doing that it becomes where it's not even about not wanting to ask, but it's about just kind of pushing it to the side because they're so hyper focused and getting that contract, getting to the next step, that I feel like, honestly, I'm guilty of this. Before you know it, your physical or your mental or your emotional well-being is what falls to the waistline. How do you identify dancers who might need support? Do you encourage the support in your classes? Like, how does that work now as in this new role? Not so
Right.
new,
Well,
but
yeah. Well, no, it still feels new in a sense. I feel like as a teacher, it's so different being a teacher than being a dancer. It's completely different. So totally two different roles. But so I'm still learning so much, and I feel like I have so much more to continue to learn. But um, I mean, obviously there are red flags to watch out for in students. I teach generally on the younger side, so like anywhere from 6 to 12. I do teach advanced dancers too, but um, in the past 6 years, more in that age group. So probably maybe not as many red flags would show up quite at that age. I think it maybe happens a little bit as they get older, but it's not that it couldn't, it's not that those dancers don't struggle with things too. So I just try in my classes to really offer all of my students kind of a safe space, whenever we're in class. Obviously, we're there to work and we're there to learn, but I also want it to be fun, because dancing is so much fun, and it's a privilege to be able to dance. And a lot of these schools that I teach for, they're beautiful ballet schools. They're the best, so it really, I try to reiterate that it's a privilege to dance in this room, and that we have to have respect for each other. But it's also a safe place where you can make mistakes and you can ask for help if you need it, or whatever they might be going through.
yeah, that's such a good point. And I also think it's such a good point that you bring up the age difference, because
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely a difference between like the 6 to 12-year-olds versus the 13 to 18-year-olds. When they're older, they have more external influences upon them. And that's when they'll go off to different summer intensives, experience perhaps, behaviors around food, pick those behaviors up. But honestly, what you're doing is super important because you're helping to lay that framework of like what they're going to be going with in regards to that mentality. So to create that safe space and make it where these younger dancers know that it's okay to maybe not strive for perfection, but instead to strive for progress, without sounding, that's so cliche, but it's very true.
No, it is. It's true. There is no such thing as perfection. I mean, that's boring anyway. And there's no trying, there's just doing, and it's either you do it well or maybe not so well, but you constantly keep trying. But that's also something that I would say the ABT's national training curriculum really emphasizes the whole dancer. You're not just training bodies to do steps. You're really setting these young people up for being able to succeed in anything they do in life, not just, what we're learning in the classroom, in the studios.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so. I always experienced that in my days. I did the ABT summer intensives as well, and I always had a very pleasurable experience there. I found that they encourage that multifaceted approach where you're not just this dancer from, heading into the studio, going out, going home, and that's it, but actually bringing so much more to the stage, so much more depth and experience. And that's I try to encourage that with the younger dancers. As much as we need to have that motivation and that drive with this art, because it truly is, you do need that. You also need to have that broad range of experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where we see something like disordered eating, how it could really limit a dancer and, cause them to have that tunnel vision towards food, towards their body, towards their exercise habits, and so forth.
Exactly. Yeah, it can be a really slippery slope. And I think the influence too of just, like you mentioned, social media, what we see isn't necessarily the reality. There's and also what might work for somebody doesn't necessarily work for you. That's great for them, but you're your own person.
Yeah, exactly. So talk to me a little bit about COVID-19 and the quarantine. How was that for you as a mom and as a teacher? Let me hear about that a little bit.
Oh my goodness, it was it was a challenge, that's for sure. But gosh, yeah, just being at home. I mean, I treasure that time that I had with my son, to be with him that much. And at the same time, to be with him that much was hard. Having little ones is always a challenge, but Zoom school for a 4-year-old is pretty difficult. So that was interesting. And then also Zoom teaching for me was a huge curveball. I'm still doing a little bit of that, with virtual privates here and there, but yeah, to have an entire level all to myself and to feel the weight of wanting to give them everything they need, but they're dancing at home on like tile or concrete or, and it's only one dimension through the screen. I can't turn around, I can't see them sideways or back, that was difficult and challenging, but we got through it. And you know there were definitely silver linings to Zoom and all of that too, like being able to reach more students that don't necessarily live just in the New York area or New Jersey or Connecticut, but people from all over the world. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm curious, what were some of the biggest adjustments that you had to make in your teaching or in what you had dancers do when over Zoom?
Mm-hmm. Well, so for me, I feel as a person, I'm generally kind of more quiet and introverted, but
Mm,
on Zoom, you kind of really have to engage them even more because you're just a screen. You're not in a room, and they're not surrounded by their peers. There's not a live pianist, so I felt like I really had to use my voice and use my vocals up and down and really keep an eye on them, say their names. And so they know, oh, she really is watching me, Um,
mhm.
Another thing, we sort of adjusted the curriculum a little bit just because, having certain things like quasi on Zoom is a little harder um, to have it done correctly. And again, we don't want to train dancers the wrong way. It's much, I'm sure you know this, it's much harder to fix something once they've already learned how to do it that way rather than to just teach it the right way the first time.
Mhm.
So yeah, those were some of the things, and just the other general stuff that people run into with Zoom, which is the sound, cutting out music when you're speaking, and yeah, so it's a little bit tricky.
Definitely. Yeah, I have that too, even just in the virtual like counseling work that I do, because so much of the work I do is a lot of mindset work as well. And you really have to give it like 200% for it to translate on the screen as just being 100%.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, the word balance and how you were able to perhaps maybe incorporate more balance into your life as an educator, and if and how you were able to do this as a dancer and how those two roles like differed.
Yeah, so well, I don't know. That's a great question. I think it's hard for dancers, I think, to have balance just because we all have such a passion and love for dance. And I think that's God given, and that's so wonderful that we have found a passion. You know, some people never find their passion. So not to downplay that, but yeah, we can get very perfectionistic and, like you said, tunnel vision. For me, I grew up in a family that we were, a Christian family, and we had a strong faith. So I always sort of feel like I had a broader vision of like dance is, that's a huge part of my life, and I have such a love for it. But it's not the be all end all. There's more to life than just what I do in my ballet classes or what I do in my rehearsals or what I do on the stage in a performance. There's just so much more than that. So I think for me, that's sort of always how I've balanced both, in my dancing, training, professional career, and also my teaching, is just sort of having the perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I love that word, perspective, and being able to take a couple steps back, look in, and making sure, because that's how you kind of evaluate if what you're doing on a day to day is balanced, or if you're leading yourself to burnout, which perfectionistic tendencies can actually do.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a line, we're our bodies, we can only push them so far.
Hmm.
And as much as we work hard, I actually just had this conversation with one of my students. As hard as we work and as much as we push ourselves, um, you can't burn the candle on both ends, so to speak. You have to get to a point where you also rest, because
Yeah,
then if you're just pushing and you're just doing all the time, it's actually harmful. You're not helping yourself. You have to rest at some point, and you have to, like you said, you have to have balance. Of course, we want to eat well, we want to fuel our bodies well, but we also are human. You also have to enjoy things, and not be so regimented all the time.
definitely. And not, try to seek so much control over everything we eat. Instead,
Mm-hmm.
think of food as also just being an experience in life.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. So, Leann, my final question for you is one that I ask everyone, and I'd love to hear how you define personally and how you reflect this onto your students, what it means to be the healthy dancer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think a lot of what I sort of said already, which is, the balance, like we talked about, working hard and knowing what's healthy, fueling our bodies with good fruits and vegetables and proteins and carbohydrates and fat, like those are all things your body absolutely needs to function well. So there's that part. There's the mental part of health, which is like, making sure that you're feeling good in your brain about things. Because I think if your mental state is sound, is healthy, kind of everything else will follow. And then, physically taking care of your body as well, because like we just said before, if you're just pushing, and I have to rehearse more, I have to take another class, and I'm going to take Pilates, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to, if you're just constantly asking something from your body and never giving back to it, like maybe having a massage if you're can afford to do that, or taking a long hot Epsom salt bath, or taking
Mhm.
a day off or two or three if you need it, those things are also just as beneficial as the training can be. um, and then I think this is something I also struggled with as a student and as a professional, and something I think a lot of my students tend to do, it's normal, we all do this, is comparison. And that is something that I think can really hinder a dancer. Don't pay attention to anybody else, and what they're doing. What works for them or what they're able to accomplish is great, but you're focusing on just you, right? And just doing what you can do today, celebrating the little victories that you have, and not focusing so much on, the mistakes that we made. So just being conscious to not compare ourselves to others. I think those things
Yeah.
for me are what kind of encompass being a healthy dancer.
Yeah, I love that, and I totally agree. I think so often it's really ingrained into us to utilize the mirror for reasons of comparisons, but we need to remember, like, comparisons can be helpful, but they can also be very harmful, and focusing only on our flaws, not on some, you know, things that we actually do well, we do differently than others is, and of course, when it comes to body shapes and sizes, having that diversity, like you said earlier, perfectionism is boring, right? Having individuality and diversity is really what the art needs in order to bring depth and to depict more storytelling on stage. Obviously, the industry has a long way to go, but I do think it's moving in the direction we want it to. It's just taking a lot of time.
Yeah, yes, you're absolutely right. It is changing. I'm so thankful for that, because it wasn't that way when you and I were training. You know, there weren't the resources that there are now, and yourself included. Like, it's so amazing the work you're doing with these dancers, and hopefully we can just continue to start shifting the thought process, and things will continue to change and kind of improve for the dance world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Leann, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been such a pleasure connecting with you, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Rachel.